exposed my cheating wife with a fake profile. My name's Lucas Reynolds, 34 years old, a software engineer with a knack for noticing patterns. And lately, something was off. My wife, Jessica, 33, a marketing executive, had been distant. The late nights, the sudden work trips, the phone she never let out of her sight. We'd been married for 8 years, no kids, but that didn't mean we weren't planning to start a family soon. Or at least, that's what I thought. It started on a Thursday night. I was working late in my home office when Jessica came home later than usual, reeking of expensive wine and wearing a new dress I hadn't seen before. "Just a client meeting," she said, kissing me on the cheek before disappearing into the shower. I wanted to believe her, but a knot tightened in my stomach. Days went by, and I couldn't shake the feeling. Then, one night, I sat alone in the living room, absent-mindedly scrolling through social media. That's when the trap began to unravel. My eyes caught something familiar on my feed. It was a photo posted by a friend of a friend, tagging Jessica's best friend, Vanessa. A snapshot of a rooftop bar, two couples laughing under dim lights. There, in the background, barely noticeable but unmistakable, was Jessica. But the man she was with? It wasn't me. My heart stopped. The man's hand rested possessively on her lower back, their faces close, too close. He was tall, maybe in his late 30s, well-dressed, and annoyingly handsome. I didn't know his name yet, but I knew his type, rich, smooth-talking, and with a knack for stealing what doesn't belong to him. But here's the kicker: the photo wasn't posted by Vanessa, or Jessica, or anyone directly connected to them. It came from someone's random night out, a mutual friend of a friend. An accidental snapshot that exposed the truth Jessica had been hiding so well. This wasn't an isolated incident. I clicked through the profile, and my stomach churned as I found more photos from that same night. Dinner, drinks, dancing. Each picture painted a clearer image of her betrayal, and not once had she mentioned that night to me. Instead of confronting her, though, I felt something darker brewing inside me. This wasn't just about Jessica cheating, this was about how far I could push it. I was done being the nice guy who got walked over. I wanted answers, but more than that, I wanted control. I created a plan that night. If she wanted to hide in the shadows of social media, I'd follow her there. That's when Ethan Cole was born. My fake persona. Ethan was the opposite of me. He was 36, a confident, well-traveled entrepreneur, and just the kind of man Jessica might fall for online. I knew how social media worked, and with a few fake pictures, a made-up backstory, and carefully placed posts, Ethan Cole came to life. I waited 2 days before I followed her account. She accepted my request within an hour. Hook, line, and sinker. The moment she started liking my posts and replying to messages, I knew I had her. But that was just the beginning. The next few days were like a slow-motion car crash. I'd see her in the mornings, sipping coffee like everything was fine, while she texted Ethan in the evenings, telling him how her job was stressing her out, how she missed traveling, how she needed an escape. Escape? From what? From me? From our life? Each message made my blood boil, but I had to play it cool. I wasn't ready to reveal my cards yet. Then came the real betrayal. It was Friday night, and she thought I was at the gym. Instead, I was in the garage, sitting in my car, watching as she posted another photo, this time on her Instagram stories. It was a shot of her legs, draped across a lounge chair, cocktail in hand. The caption needed this. I tapped through her other stories until I saw him again. The same guy from the rooftop bar. This time, his face was clear. He had his arm around her, and they were at some kind of event. Fancy, somewhere expensive, and definitely not a work-related function. My heart pounded in my chest as I clicked back to the beginning of her stories. She had tagged the venue. Stupid. So stupid. Didn't she realize I'd see it? But that was the beauty of it. She didn't know. She thought she was clever, pulling one over on me, a trusting husband who would never suspect a thing. Except now, I knew everything. I closed Instagram and stared at the steering wheel, my mind racing. Confronting her would be too easy, too straightforward. She had played me for a fool, and I wanted to do more than just yell at her for it. I wanted to make her feel the betrayal, the lies, the deception, just like I had. Ethan Cole had more work to do. The next step? I needed to know just how far she'd go with this. What would she confess to Ethan that she wouldn't tell me? As Jessica came home that night, smiling like she had just won some secret victory, I smiled back. But inside, I was ready to tear it all down. The days blurred into a sick, twisted routine. Every night, Jessica would slip further into her fake world, chatting with Ethan like she was some single, free-spirited woman with nothing holding her back. She'd send him messages filled with longing, flirty emojis, and inside jokes she'd never shared with me. Every smile she flashed my way felt like another knife to the chest, but I kept playing along. After all, I wasn't just her husband anymore, I was Ethan, too. I'd wait for her to go to bed, pretending to be busy with work, and then I'd log into the Ethan account, crafting the perfect responses. Ethan was smooth. He was charming, understanding, the kind of man who made Jessica feel like she was heard. I dangled promises of fancy getaways, whispered sweet nothings that left her wanting more, all the while biding my time for the moment I'd strike. But then, the game changed. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had been working from home, casually chatting with Jessica as Ethan while she was supposedly in a meeting. The conversation was flowing like usual, filled with her typical complaints about work and how she felt so trapped. But then she dropped a bombshell. "So, there's something I've been meaning to tell you, Ethan. It's kinda crazy." My fingers froze over the keyboard. Something in her tone, the way she was hesitating, made my gut churn. "What is it?" I typed, keeping my reply short and curious, the way Ethan would. Her response came after a few agonizing minutes. "I've been seeing someone. Well, kind of, but it's complicated. He's married." My heart raced. I hadn't expected her to open up this quickly, to start revealing the very thing I was hunting down. She wasn't just talking about us, she was about to tell Ethan all about her affair with this other guy, the one from the rooftop bar. A married man? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. This was too rich. Here I was, setting a trap, and now Jessica was about to spill the beans on yet another affair. This wasn't just about her lying to me, this was about her tangled web of lies with someone else, too. And the audacity of it. She was telling me, Ethan, about this like it was no big deal. Like I wouldn't care. I played it cool. "Wow, really? Does his wife know?" I typed, fully expecting Jessica to downplay the situation, to act like this was just some harmless fling she'd gotten caught up in. But her next reply shattered everything I thought I knew. "Actually, his wife and I are kinda close. She has no idea though. I don't even know how it happened, but, I feel like I can't stop." I stared at the screen, my mind struggling to catch up with the revelation. She was sleeping with one of my friends. It had to be. There was no other explanation. Jessica wasn't the type to have close, married friends. Our circle was small, intimate. The kind of couples that hung out on weekends for barbecues or game nights. I scrolled back in our conversations, searching for any hint I might have missed. Then, it hit me, Darren. My closest friend from work, married to Emily, Jessica's closest friend. No freaking way. They had been spending more time together lately, with Jessica offering to help Emily plan a surprise for Darren's upcoming birthday. All the little details clicked into place. The random outings, the late-night meetings. It was Darren. Jessica was having an affair with my best friend. The room spun around me as the betrayal deepened. This wasn't just some random fling with a stranger, it was personal. Darren, the man who had stood beside me at my wedding, who toasted to our future together, was screwing my wife behind my back. And now Jessica was confessing it to me, to Ethan, like I was some anonymous stranger who would give her sympathy. I felt rage boiling beneath the surface, but I kept my cool, typing slowly, methodically. This had to be handled carefully. I couldn't let on that I knew, not yet. "Wow, that sounds intense," I replied, keeping the tone casual. "Do you want to get out of it, or?" Her answer was the final nail in the coffin. "I don't know, Ethan. Part of me feels guilty, but the other part feels alive, you know, like, with him. I feel like I have control over my life again. It's different than my marriage. Lucas and well, let's just say it's complicated." Complicated? After 8 years of marriage, she reduced it to complicated. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the edge of my desk, forcing myself to stay calm. The rage in me wasn't just from the cheating, it was from the casual way she dismissed our life together, the years we'd built, like it was nothing more than an afterthought to her little affair. But there was one part of her confession that stood out. Control. She felt like she had control with Darren, as if she had lost it with me. Well, it was time to show her just how much control she really had. I typed my response, cold and calculated. "I get it. Sometimes you need to feel in control, to break free. Maybe we should meet. I'd love to hear more about this over drinks, just the two of us." Jessica took the bait without hesitation. "That sounds amazing, Ethan. I'll make time this Friday. Lucas will be out of town for a conference anyway, so it's perfect." Out of town? Conference? I didn't have any travel planned for Friday. My blood boiled again as I realized she had already created her alibi, ready to step out with Darren once more. I knew what had to happen next. Revenge. but not just any revenge. I wanted her to suffer the way I had, to feel the weight of every lie she had told. But first, I needed to plan. And when the time came, I would make sure Darren was caught in the crossfire too. This wasn't just about Jessica anymore. It was about dismantling the life she thought she could control. By the time Friday rolled around, I had transformed from the heartbroken husband into a man on a mission. The betrayal cut deep, deeper than I had ever imagined, but instead of drowning in it, I sharpened my focus. This wasn't going to be some messy, emotional confrontation. No, this would be calculated. I wasn't just going to ruin Jessica's affair, I was going to ruin the very illusion she had built around her life. I had a plan, and if it went off the way I imagined, she wouldn't just be left with a broken heart, she'd be left with nothing. And Darren? Well, let's just say his picture-perfect life was about to get scorched too. Jessica was meeting Ethan at a bar downtown, the same rooftop lounge where I had first discovered her affair. I couldn't resist the poetic justice. I arrived early, blending into the crowd, sitting in the shadows where I could see everything but remain unseen. From this vantage point, I would witness the unraveling of her lies firsthand. I messaged Jessica from Ethan's account. "I'm here. Grabbed a spot by the bar, can't wait to finally meet you in person." Her reply came quick, dripping with eagerness. "On my way. Hope you're as cute in person as you are online." It sickened me, but I had to keep up the charade a little longer. She was about to walk into a trap, and she had no idea. Before I left the house, I'd planted a carefully orchestrated series of traps. I knew Jessica wasn't planning to be back home until late. That left me plenty of time to set up my next move. While she was getting ready for her little date, I had sent a text to Darren's wife, Emily. The message was simple but devastating. "Hey Emily, not sure if you've heard, but Darren and Jessica have been spending a lot of time together lately. You might want to check his messages. Just a heads up from a concerned friend." The perfect seed of doubt. Emily wasn't the suspicious type, but I knew that one small push in the right direction would get her digging. And once she found the messages between Darren and Jessica, well, the rest would take care of itself. I also made sure to leave a trail for her to follow. The burner phone I had bought for Ethan was wiped clean of any connection to me, but I left enough digital breadcrumbs for Emily to trace Darren's affair right back to that night. My plan was to time it perfectly so that by the time Jessica and Darren were caught up in their little world, Emily would come storming in, her fury doing most of my dirty work. I didn't have to wait long. About 10 minutes later, Jessica entered the bar, scanning the room nervously before making her way to the exact spot Ethan had told her to meet. Her tight black dress clung to her in all the right places, her hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. The effort she had put in just to impress a man she didn't even know was laughable. For a moment, I couldn't believe I was still playing this game. How could someone I had spent almost a decade with be so shallow? So willing to throw everything away for a fantasy? But this wasn't the time for reflection. It was time for action. I sent her a final message. "Change of plans. Meet me upstairs on the terrace. I'm waiting for you there. It's quieter." Her face lit up as she read the text, her excitement palpable. She hurried off to the elevator without a second thought. I followed from a distance, my pulse quickening as the moment of truth approached. I stepped onto the terrace before she did, positioning myself in a corner where I had the perfect view of her approach. When she stepped out of the elevator, she looked around, a mix of nerves and anticipation on her face. I could tell she was searching for Ethan, ready to finally lay eyes on the man she thought she'd been falling for. Instead, she found me. For a split second, she didn't register it was me. The lighting was dim, and she probably didn't expect her own husband to be standing there. But then her eyes widened, her smile faltering, replaced by confusion. "Lucas? What are you doing here?" I stayed silent, my gaze locked onto hers. I could see the gears turning in her mind, the realization dawning in real time. Her phone buzzed, and I knew it was the notification from Ethan that I had just sent. Slowly, she looked down at her screen, and then back up at me. Her face drained of color. "No, it can't be." "Oh, it can be," I said, my voice cold, steady. "Ethan never existed, Jess. It was me. Every flirty message, every secret you spilled, you've been talking to me this whole time." Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and horror. "Lucas, save it." My voice cut through her pathetic attempt at an apology. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to watch your wife flirt with another man? To hear her talk about how alive she feels when she's cheating on her husband? How little you care about the life we've built together?" Her lips quivered, but no words came out. I could see her panic rising, her mind scrambling for a way to escape this confrontation. But there was no escape. And don't think for a second this ends with just you, Jess. Darren's going down too. At the mention of Darren's name, her eyes snapped up. Darren? No, Lucas, please. Oh, you didn't think I'd figured that out? The affair with my best friend? You're sick, Jess. Both of you. Tears filled her eyes as she tried to move closer, reaching out for me. Lucas, I never meant for this to happen. It just got out of control. You think I care about your excuses? I spat. I've got everything lined up. I know what you've been doing. Emily's going to find out too, any minute now. I made sure of it. Her expression turned from shock to terror as she realized the full scope of what I'd set in motion. Her entire world was crashing down around her, and she couldn't stop it. Lucas, please, don't do this. We can fix it, we can. But I wasn't listening anymore. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment she would pay for everything. The pieces were in place, the revenge was unfolding, and soon, both Jessica and Darren would feel the full weight of their betrayal. Jessica's pleading eyes tracked me as I turned away, walking towards the edge of the terrace, letting the cool breeze hit my face. I could feel the tension in the air as she stood frozen, processing the full weight of the situation. The tables had turned, and for once, I was in control of the narrative. As I stared out into the city skyline, my phone buzz in my pocket. I glanced down. It was Emily. Perfect timing. Emily, you were right. I saw the messages. I'm on my way to confront him. I couldn't help but smirk. Everything was falling into place exactly as I had planned. Jessica's betrayal wasn't going to remain hidden in the shadows. It was about to be laid bare for everyone to see, and there wasn't a damn thing she could do to stop it. I turned back to Jessica, who had her arms wrapped around herself, as if that could somehow shield her from the storm she knew was coming. Her tears were streaming freely now, and she was muttering incoherently, desperate to make sense of her crumbling world. Lucas, please, she whimpered. We don't have to do this. We can fix it. I was stupid, I know, but I cut her off sharply, my voice slicing through her desperation like a knife. There is no we anymore, Jess. You destroyed that the moment you decided to lie, sneak around, and throw away everything we had for, what? A few cheap thrills? Darren? At the mention of his name, Jessica flinched. She knew where this was heading, but she couldn't stop it. Not anymore. You thought you could play with fire and not get burned? Well, guess what, Jess, this whole thing is about to go up in flames. Darren's wife is coming, and she's pissed. Her face twisted in horror, her breath hitching in her throat. Emily, no. No, 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 Lucas, please, don't do this to me, to us. There is no us, Jess. There hasn't been for a long time. I let that hang in the air for a moment, watching as her last shred of hope disintegrated. Suddenly, her phone rang. It was Darren. I motioned for her to pick it up, my expression cold and unyielding. Go ahead, answer it. Let's see what your lover has to say. Her shaking fingers fumbled with the phone as she answered, her voice trembling. Darren? I could hear him on the other end, his tone laced with urgency. Jess, we've got a problem. Emily just found the messages. She knows. She's coming for me. I don't know what to do. Jessica's eyes darted to mine, panic flooding her features. I leaned in slightly, just enough for her to hear me whisper, tell him where you are. Let him come. She hesitated, but the look in my eyes left no room for argument. Slowly, she relayed the information to Darren. I'm at the rooftop bar. You need to come now. As soon as she hung up, I stepped back and folded my arms. You just invited him into the lion's den, Jess. This is going to be fun. But wait, the next 20 minutes felt like an eternity. Jessica stood there, her body trembling, her eyes darting toward the elevator every few seconds, waiting for Darren to arrive. I stayed silent, watching her unravel, savoring the anticipation. The trap was set now, all I had to do was wait for it to snap shut. Finally, the elevator dinged, and the doors slid open. Darren stepped out, looking disheveled and panicked. His eyes scanned the terrace until they landed on Jessica, but before he could make his way to her, another figure appeared behind him. Emily. Her face was a mask of rage and betrayal. She stormed out of the elevator, her gaze locked onto Darren like a predator closing in on its prey. You son of a bitch. Emily's voice echoed across the terrace, sharp and venomous. Darren's head whipped around just in time to see her marching toward him, fists clenched, her eyes blazing with fury. Emily, wait. I can explain. Darren's voice was frantic, but it was too late. The slap she delivered to his face reverberated through the air like a thunderclap. Explain? Explain? You've been screwing Jessica behind my back, and you think there's something you can say to fix this? Darren staggered back, his hand flying to his reddening cheek, but before he could respond, Emily's gaze shifted to Jessica. Her expression turned even colder. "And you," Emily spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You lying, home-wrecking piece of trash. I trusted you. I thought you were my friend." Jessica couldn't meet her gaze. She just stood there, sobbing, her hands covering her face. The final blow. As the confrontation unfolded, I remained silent, letting Emily do most of the heavy lifting. This was exactly what I had wanted, a public, humiliating reckoning. But I wasn't done yet. "Emily, there's something else you should know," I said, stepping forward. Both Darren and Jessica looked at me in horror, as if they knew what was coming next. "You see, Darren and Jessica didn't just sneak around behind your back. They've been lying to both of us for months. They've built this entire secret relationship on a foundation of lies." Emily's eyes flickered with confusion. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, preparing to deliver the final blow. "Jessica has been leading Darren on, telling him she's planning to leave me for him. But she's been playing both sides. And Darren, well, he's been lying to you, too, about everything. This isn't the first time he's cheated." Darren's face went pale. "Lucas, what the hell are you?" "Don't bother, Darren," I snapped. "Emily deserves to know the truth." I watched as Emily's anger turned into something darker, colder. Her eyes, once blazing with fury, now narrowed with a calculating look. She wasn't just angry anymore, she was plotting her own revenge. "You two deserve each other," Emily finally said, her voice like ice. "I hope you both rot in hell." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Darren and Jessica standing there, broken and exposed. I stood back, watching the wreckage I had created. The betrayal, the lies, the affair, they were all out in the open now. And as I looked at the shattered faces of the two people who had tried to deceive me, I felt nothing. There was no sense of satisfaction, no triumph, just an empty void where my marriage and friendship had once been. But I wasn't done. I turned to Jessica, my voice low and deadly. "Pack your things and leave, Jess. I'm filing for divorce first thing in the morning. And don't expect to get anything from me, not after this." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't care anymore. This was the end of her world, and I was ready to walk away from the ashes. Darren stood there, still trying to process what had just happened, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of a final word. I simply turned and walked away, leaving the two of them to deal with the mess they had created. I sat in the stillness of my empty living room, the echo of Jessica's final footsteps fading from my memory. It had been a week since that rooftop confrontation, since everything came crashing down. The divorce papers were filed, and Jessica had packed her things and left. There was no drama, no final tearful goodbye, just the cold, inevitable end of a marriage built on lies. As I sipped my coffee, staring at the blank television screen, I found myself wondering if this hollow feeling would ever fade. On the surface, I had won. My revenge played out flawlessly. Darren and Jessica were exposed, humiliated, and left to pick up the pieces of their broken lives. But beneath the surface, the victory didn't taste as sweet as I thought it would. I'd thought that revealing the affair, watching them crumble, would bring some sort of satisfaction, but all it brought was emptiness. The love we once had was gone, and now, even the anger had faded, leaving only a strange numbness in its place. Darren and Emily's divorce was already making waves in their social circle. Emily wasn't the type to go quietly, and she made sure everyone knew exactly why her marriage had ended. Darren's reputation was in tatters, rumors swirled, and he had to step down from his management position at the tech firm. His face was plastered all over social media, painted as the villain, and every time I scrolled through my feed, I couldn't help but chuckle. His life had become a public spectacle, just as I'd planned. As for Jessica, she had moved in with her sister in a small apartment downtown. We hadn't spoken since the night I handed her the divorce papers. There were no late-night calls begging for another chance, no grand apologies, just silence. Maybe she finally realized that it was over, that there was no going back. But the most surprising twist came from Emily. After our confrontation, I expected her to vanish from my life, but she didn't. Instead, she reached out to me, first with a simple text, "Thank you for telling me the truth." Then, a few days later, another, "We should grab a drink sometime, talk things through." At first, I wasn't sure what to make of it. Was she reaching out for closure, or was there something more? Curiosity got the better of me, and eventually, I agreed. A drink with Emily felt like a strange full circle to this whole ordeal. When I met Emily at a quiet bar downtown, I expected bitterness or anger. Instead, I found something else, relief. She looked different, lighter, as if the weight of Darren's betrayal had finally lifted off her shoulders. As we talked, I realized she was more like me than I had imagined. We'd both been blindsided, both hurt, both seeking some form of closure from the wreckage that was our marriages. "I've been thinking a lot about what you did, Lucas," Emily said, swirling the last bit of wine in her glass. "I was angry at first, thinking you were cruel to set it all up like that. But honestly, I'm glad you did. It was brutal, but it gave me the push I needed to walk away. If I hadn't seen it for myself, I might have stayed with him. God knows why, but I might have." I nodded, understanding her sentiment all too well. I just needed the truth out in the open. For too long, I was living in the dark, thinking things would go back to normal. But there was no normal to go back to. Emily leaned in slightly, her expression softening. "And now, how are you doing?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't really thought about it. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm free, I guess, but also lost. Everything feels surreal. I wanted the revenge, I wanted them to pay, and they did, but now I'm just here." She gave me a small, knowing smile. "That's the thing about revenge, isn't it? It feels good in the moment, but once the dust settles, you're still left with the ruins." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. She was right. The ruins were all that remained. But then, something shifted. There was a glimmer of something else, something unexpected. As the evening went on, our conversation flowed more easily, the bitterness and pain of the past melting away into something lighter. We laughed about old stories, shared our hopes for the future, and by the end of the night, it felt less like two people nursing their wounds and more like two people moving forward. As we said our goodbyes, Emily paused for a moment, her eyes searching mine. "I don't know what the future holds, Lucas, but maybe we don't have to figure it out alone." I smiled, unsure of what to say. Maybe she was right. Maybe this wasn't the end of the story, maybe it was the beginning of something new. Days passed, and life slowly returned to a new kind of normal. I no longer woke up dreading the day ahead, no longer felt that gnawing sense of betrayal eating away at me. It wasn't that the pain was gone completely, it was just quieter now, like a storm that had finally blown over. The divorce finalized without much fuss. Jessica didn't fight for alimony or the house. In the end, I think she just wanted to disappear, to start over far away from the mess she'd made. And honestly, I was okay with that. We were done, and I was ready to leave it all behind. As for Darren, he faded into obscurity, his reputation destroyed. The tech company quietly removed him from his role, and as far as I knew, he had moved to a different city to start over. Emily and I stayed in touch. We weren't rushing into anything, but there was something comforting about knowing I wasn't alone in this. Maybe we'd see where things went, or maybe we'd just stay friends. Either way, it felt good to have someone who understood. Looking back on everything, I realized that revenge had been my way of coping, of regaining control in a situation where I felt powerless. And in a way, it worked. It gave me closure, it gave me the truth, and it exposed the lies that had been festering in the dark. But more importantly, it gave me a clean slate, a chance to rebuild, to start over, and to figure out who I was beyond the broken marriage. And while the road ahead was still uncertain, one thing was clear: I wasn't the same person I was before. I had walked through the fire, and though I wasn't unscathed, I was stronger, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready for whatever came next.